Chapter 17. Mr. Northwood? That was my first thought. Thank goodness I was wrong. Joanna, Margaret called. She stepped up to me on the driveway. I saw that she carried an aluminum pot in her hands. Margaret, what are you doing here? I cried. Even in the darkness, I could see the accusing glare of her eyes. You said you had the flu, Joanna. Yeah, well, a sour aroma rose on the wet night air. Skunk smell. Ooh, what's that? Margaret twisted her features in disgust. It's a long story, I said. I led her into the house. The lights were on. I could hear Mom moving around in the back. I called to her that I was home. Then I turned to Margaret. She wore a pink down parka, a hand-me-down from her cousin. The hood flopped awkwardly behind her head. Her carrot-colored hair was disheveled, and it clashed with the pink coat. She raised the pot to me. I brought you chicken soup. My mom had some in the freezer. You said you had the flu. I'm sorry, I began. You could have told me you had other plans, Margaret interrupted shrilly. You didn't have to lie to me. I didn't really have plans, I said, pretty lame. I could see the hurt in Margaret's eyes. If you didn't want to study with me tonight, you should have just said so, Joanna. You're right, I said, taking the soup from her. I'm sorry. Dennis came over and... You don't belong with them, she said bitterly. Huh? Her words caught me by surprise. They're different from us, Margaret continued, staring hard at me. They're used to doing whatever they want. They don't care who they hurt. You're being a little dramatic, aren't you? I shot back. You've been watching too many soaps, Margaret. I'm right, Margaret said. You'll be sorry. Thanks, Mom, I said sarcastically. Enjoy the soup, Margaret said. See you around. She turned quickly and hurried out the door. In the weeks to come, Dennis and his friends started hanging out at my house. They would come over after dinner, and we'd kid around and have a lot of laughs and study together. My house wasn't as big or as fancy as theirs, but I think they liked hanging out there because there were no parents around. Since my mom was almost always at work, we had the house to ourselves. I spent a lot of time daydreaming about Dennis, trying to figure out how I could make him dump Caitlin for good and start going out with me. Most everyone was still having trouble with Mr. Northwood. I think he suspected that Dennis and his friends were responsible for the skunk juice attack, and so he was meaner than ever to them. He gave both Dennis and Zach failing grades for the term. That meant that Dennis was no longer eligible for the track team. Dennis's parents came to school and argued with Mr. Hernandez, but this time the principal backed up Mr. Northwood. Mr. Northwood also made Caitlin and Melody come in for an hour after school every day for a week, just because they were laughing together during a class discussion, and he threatened to keep us all from going on our spring class trip if our projects weren't handed in on time. So as the days went by, we continued to joke about how we wanted to murder Mr. Northwood. And then, late on a Thursday night, it stopped being a joke. Zach had sneaked 2 six-packs of beer from his house, and we were all sipping from the cans as we did our homework, sprawled around my living room. I was slumped in the armchair, trying to concentrate on Hamlet. Dennis and Caitlin were at opposite ends of the couch, scribbling in their chemistry notebooks. Zach, Lanny, and Melody were on their stomachs on the carpet, immersed in different books. I heard Dennis mutter something about needing a pencil, but I didn't see him get up or walk over to the little green table against the wall. I glanced up in time to see him pull open the drawer. Wow. His eyes were wide as he reached in and pulled out the little pistol. Wow, we really could kill Mr. Northwood, Dennis exclaimed. Dennis, put that away, Caitlin cried from the couch. She immediately sounded very frightened. What's that? Lanny called, glancing up from the floor. We could shoot him. We really could, Dennis cried with surprising enthusiasm. I saw him click the bullet cartridge into the handle. Dennis, whoa, I said, closing my book. I had a tight feeling in my chest, a feeling of dread. Hey, Zach, check this out, Dennis cried, ignoring me. He tossed a loaded pistol across the room to Zach. Zach reached up and caught it, spilling his beer on the carpet. He didn't seem to notice. He rolled the silver pistol around in his hands, examining it carefully. Is it real? He asked me. I've never held a real gun before. My dad left it, I explained, for protection. Put it away, okay? Yeah, put it away, come on, Caitlin pleaded. But Zach handed it to Lanny. Lanny pretended to shoot Dennis. Dennis grabbed his chest and staggered to the floor. The boys laughed. The girls didn't. I jumped to my feet. Come on, guys, stop messing around with that. You're scaring me. You really are. I'm leaving, Melody said tensely. She slammed her book shut and stood up. If you don't put that away, I'm leaving. This is just stupid. Lanny had tossed down 3 beers. His eyes were kind of watery. He grinned at Melody. Then he spun the pistol on his finger. Always wanted to be a cowboy, he murmured. We could shoot Northwood, Dennis said, scratching his head. It would be so easy. He crossed the room and took the pistol from Lanny. Bye, Melody said. I'm serious. I'm leaving. She started toward the front hall. Dennis carried the pistol to the window. He aimed it out at the darkness and pretended to fire it. Bang! You're dead, Mr. Northwood, he said, grinning. He tossed the pistol to Zach. What do you think, man? Zach missed. The gun bounced on the carpet, stopping at his feet. Put it away, please, I shouted. We shoot Northwood, then we hide the gun, Dennis said. Then we pretend like nothing happened. No one is going to suspect a group of nice, respectable teenagers like us. You're crazy, Dennis, Caitlin said shrilly. You're really crazy? Zach aimed a gun at Lanny. Bang, gotcha. Give me that, Lanny demanded. Zach tossed the gun to him. Lanny examined it again. He looked up at me. Killer gun, he exclaimed. Is that supposed to be a joke? I asked. I walked over and tried to swipe it from his hands, but he tossed it back to Dennis. Dennis bobbled it, nearly dropped it. Then he twirled it on his finger. Dennis, please, Melody begged from the doorway. Watch this, Dennis said, grinning at me. Watch the quick draw. No, please, I cried. Ignoring me, Dennis slid the pistol into his jeans pocket. At the count of 3, he said, his green eyes flashing excitedly. He counted to 3. Then he grabbed for the gun, cowboy style, and drew it from his pocket. We all gasped when it went off. It sounded like the loudest firecracker. And then Zach let out an agonized scream. I gaped in open-mouthed horror as the bright blood spread over the shoulder of his shirt, a small circle at first, growing bigger, bigger. Zach let out another frightened scream, weaker this time. Then, clutching his bleeding shoulder, he dropped to his knees. His eyes rolled up in his head, and he slumped heavily forward onto the carpet. Chapter 18. Help me, Zach groaned. Get a doctor. Get a doctor. The blood. It's... He grimaced in pain and shut his eyes. The bright circle of blood spread over the shoulder of his shirt. Blood trickled to the carpet. Please, Zach moaned, his eyes still shut. We were all in a panic. Caitlin had her hands pressed against her cheeks. She was panting loudly, shaking her head, large tears rolling down her face. Do something? He's going to die, she shrieked. He's going to die? Lanny stood frozen in the center of the room, his eyes wide with fear. Oh, I feel sick, Melody murmured, her face as white as a sheet. She started running to the hallway, but she didn't make it to the bathroom. She got as far as the front entryway and started puking her guts out. I was as panicked as everyone else. I stood staring down at Zach, screaming, Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! In a high-pitched, shrill voice. But in my horror, I made no attempt to get to the phone. Melody was retching loudly in the front hall. Caitlin was sobbing, tugging at handfuls of her short brown hair. Lanny hadn't moved from the center of the room. You shot him? You shot him? Don't let him die? Caitlin wailed. Only Dennis remained able to think clearly. I saw his green eyes narrow as he stared down at Zach. He still gripped the pistol in one hand. He raised his eyes to mine and gestured with it. Call 911, Dennis instructed me. Hurry. Get the police and an ambulance. Dennis's voice was calm and low. His cool manner helped to steady me a little. I obediently made my way to the phone on the table in front of the window. Zach, can you walk? I heard Dennis ask. Can you stand up? Get up, Zach. I called the emergency number. I told them there had been a shooting. I gave them my address. I was starting to think clearly again. My heart was still racing. My hands were as cold as ice. But my mind was starting to work. When I turned around, I saw Dennis and Lanny helping Zach toward the front door. There was a dark puddle of blood on the carpet where Zach had fallen. No, don't move him, I cried. We have to. I have an idea, Dennis snapped at me. Stop the bleeding, Caitlin screamed. Stop the bleeding. He's going to die. Clean up the blood. Quick, Dennis ordered me. He and Lanny were dragging Zach toward the door. Zach groaned in pain. Dennis, I don't understand. Where are you taking him? I asked, totally confused. You'll see, Dennis replied tensely. I have a good idea, Joanna. I'll explain later. There's no time. Just clean up the blood. Hurry. Zach groaned. It hurts really bad. Don't let him die, Caitlin shrieked. Please don't let him die. Zach had his arms around the two boys' shoulders. They guided him slowly from the room. The ambulance is coming, Lanny told Zach. It's coming. Keep walking, Dennis told him. Can you walk? Keep going, man. They made their way past Melody, who was leaning against the wall, holding her stomach with one hand. Her blonde hair had fallen over her face. She was struggling to catch her breath. Don't move him. He's bleeding too much, Caitlin called in panic. Help Joanna clean up, Dennis ordered her. It'll be okay. Trust me. Caitlin and I stared quizzically at each other. What on earth could Dennis be thinking of? My mind was spinning. I couldn't think clearly at all. I kept hearing the gun go off, kept seeing the circle of blood grow wider on Zach's shirt. I'll listen to Dennis, I decided. Dennis has a plan. Dennis has an idea. I ran to the kitchen to get sponges and a mop and soap. Caitlin followed close behind. I don't think she wanted to be alone. What is Dennis doing? She asked me in a tiny, frightened voice. Zach needs a doctor? A doctor? Where are they taking him? We're in such trouble? Such terrible trouble? What is Dennis doing? I don't know, I replied, pulling open the broom closet and dragging out the cleaning supplies. I think we have to do what he says. But what is Dennis doing? Caitlin repeated, her eyes red and tight with terror. What is he doing? We cleaned up the living room as best we could. Melody was no help at all. She was bent over in a chair, crying and holding her stomach. As soon as we'd finished, Caitlin and I left her there and hurried outside. It was a cold, moonless night. Low black clouds made the sky darker than usual. I heard the rising wail of sirens close by. The police and ambulance are on their way, I thought. Will Zach be okay? I wondered. Will they get here in time? And then the approaching sirens reminded me that we were all in serious trouble. My mom suddenly flashed into my mind. What would she say when she learned we'd been playing with a gun and accidentally shot Zach? What if Zach dies? I thought. What if he bleeds to death? Would we all be arrested for murder? What are we doing out here? I asked aloud. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the 3 boys in Mr. Northwood's yard. Zach was lying on his back in the grass. Lanny stood over him. Dennis came jogging to the driveway when he saw Caitlin and me. Just go along with my story, he urged us breathlessly. Even in the darkness, I could see the excitement on his face. Where's the gun? I asked. Dennis pointed toward the house. I don't understand, I murmured. The yard filled with swirling red lights. The twin sirens wailed, and then cut off. Headlights rolled over Zach, lying on the cold, hard ground, with his knees slightly raised. Mr. Northwood's porch light flashed on. The front door opened. Mr. Northwood stepped out on the stoop. He was in a black turtleneck and baggy gray sweatpants. What's going on? What's happening? The teacher shouted, anger mixed with confusion. His shoe bumped something. He bent over, and I saw him pick up an object. The pistol. Red lights swirled over everything. Car doors slammed behind us. Zach lay motionless on the lawn. It was hard to see anything in the swirling red lights and blinding white headlights. 2 dark uniformed police officers appeared, hands in their gun holsters. What's happening here? One of them demanded. He shot Zach, Dennis cried, pointing at Mr. Northwood. Huh? The police officer raised his eyes to the stoop. Hey, he screamed angrily. You, drop the gun, now. Mr. Northwood uttered a startled cry. He let the pistol fall. He shot Zach, Dennis repeated, still pointing at Mr. Northwood. Northwood shot Zach. Chapter 19. Dennis lowered his face to mine and kissed my cheek. The kiss sent a shiver down the back of my neck. I turned to kiss his lips. A long, tender kiss. When it ended, I slid my hands behind his head and kissed him again. The car windows had steamed up. I couldn't see out at all. We were alone in our own warm, private world. Leaning over the seat, I held him close. I could smell the coconut shampoo he used on his hair. I'd better get home, I whispered, before Mom gets back from work. You know I'm not allowed to see you. Just a few more minutes, he pleaded, his eyes burning into mine. It was 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after the terrible night Zach had been shot. Zach was okay. Miraculously, the bullet hadn't damaged anything vital in his shoulder. It would be healed completely in a few months. But nothing was the same for any of the rest of us. At first, the police had been ready to believe that Mr. Northwood shot Zach. His fingerprints were on the gun after all. But then they learned that the gun was registered to my dad, and then they saw the bloodstains on my carpet that I hadn't been able to get up. And then the truth came out. We had no choice. We had to tell them what really happened. The officers drove us to the Shadyside police station. I don't remember if they charged us with a crime or not. I was so messed up and so frightened. Dennis's parents and the other parents got to the police station at once. I don't know how they did it, but they got the whole thing hushed up. It was all taken care of that night. The shooting never even made the newspaper. The next day, the parents appeared at school and tried to get us all transferred from Mr. Northwood's class, but the school didn't cooperate. Mr. Northwood didn't press charges or anything. Maybe the parents paid him something. I don't know. We all had to continue in his history class, and now he was really on our case. Mine too. He was cold and cruel, and he didn't even try to appear to be fair. He piled on tons of extra homework, especially on weekends, and made us do long, boring papers the other kids didn't have to write. He gave us failing grades on our exams for the stupidest reasons. All in all, he did everything he could to pay us back and make our lives miserable. After the shooting, my mom didn't react the way I thought she would. I guess parents seldom do. I thought she would scream and yell and get hysterical, but instead, she quietly told me how disappointed in me she was. I think I wanted her to scream and yell. The hurt look in her eyes was a lot more painful than any harsh words would have been. "Your rich friends are a bad influence," Mom said softly, wet tears brimming in her tired eyes. "I won't allow you to see any of them again." She gave me a speech about how irresponsible I was to take the gun out, and locked it away in the bottom drawer of the desk in the living room. And so I've been sneaking out to see Dennis ever since. I didn't like sneaking around behind my mom's back, but I couldn't help it. I was falling in love with Dennis, and I would do anything to see him. We would park up on River Ridge, the high cliff that overlooked town. It was a popular parking spot for Shadyside High kids, but it was so cold out, we were usually the only car up there. Dennis and I would hold each other and kiss, long, sweet kisses, and talk. Mostly Dennis would talk about how Mr. Northwood was ruining his life, destroying his chances to be on the Olympic track team, and ruining his whole future. "He's going to fail me, I know he is," Dennis would say, shaking his head unhappily. "He wants to pay us all back. He's going to flunk us all." I wanted to say something encouraging, but I had the feeling that Dennis was right. I loved looking at Dennis, just gazing at him, even when he was unhappy and grumbling about Mr. Northwood. I liked his dark eyebrows, the way they formed wide, upside-down V's above his deep green eyes. I liked his smooth, straight nose and his toothy smile. He looked like a little boy when he smiled. I often thought about Dennis and how he had acted the night Zach was shot. He was so calm, so quick-thinking. Dennis was so determined to get what he wanted. He came up with an idea, and then he made it happen. He acted with such confidence. I wondered what it would feel like to be like Dennis, to feel like you can get whatever you want, that you can do anything, and get away with it. "We'd better get home," I whispered, wiping away a circle of steam from the passenger window with my hand. "I don't want to, but I have to." Dennis stared straight ahead at the steamed-up windshield. He made no move to start up the car. "What's wrong?" I asked, placing my hand tenderly on his. "Thinking about Northwood," he muttered. "Not tonight," I pleaded. "I mean, what can we do?" "Lanny dared me to kill him," Dennis revealed, avoiding my eyes. "Huh?" I wasn't sure I heard right. "Lanny dared me to," Dennis repeated. He squeezed my hand between both of his. "Then I dared Zach to do it." He snickered, as if he had just made a joke. "Zach's still all bandaged up," I murmured. "We were all daring each other to do it," Dennis said, shaking his head, "in study hall." He turned to me. I saw that his chin was trembling. "Is he going to cry?" I wondered, startled. I can't let Northwood wreck my whole life," he declared in a trembling voice. "Somebody has to do something about him. Somebody has to." His eyes burned into mine. I'm not sure why, but I think I loved him more than ever at that moment. I wanted him to be mine, all mine. I didn't want to share him with Caitlin anymore. I wanted him to be with me, and I wanted him to like me. "Maybe I should dare you to kill him," Dennis teased, tenderly moving his finger down the side of my face. "You've always wanted to be included in our stupid dares, haven't you?" "Maybe," I replied coyly, smiling back at him. "Well, maybe I should dare you," he repeated, his eyes flashing. "Go ahead. Try me," I whispered, grabbing his hand. His expression turned solemn. His eyes burned into mine. "I dare you to kill Northwood," he said. "Okay," I replied, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "I'll do it." Chapter 20. "Good luck, Joanna." I turned from my locker to see who was talking to me. A girl with long blonde hair tied in a long, thick braid flashed me a smile. "Good luck," she repeated. "Huh?" I just stared at her. I didn't know what she was talking about. Then, slowly, it dawned on me. She was wishing me good luck on the dare, good luck on killing Mr. Northwood. Hey, I'm getting famous, I thought. I wasn't sure if I was happy about it or not. It was the following Monday. I had the feeling that kids were staring at me, talking about me, all down the hall. I slammed the locker shut and started to class, when I felt a hand touch my back. "Oh, hi, Margaret," I said, turning to face her. I hadn't seen much of Margaret lately. I knew she didn't approve of Dennis and my other new friends. She and I just didn't have much in common anymore. "Joanna, what's going on?" Margaret demanded. She had a fretful frown on her face, and she looked me up and down, as if searching for fleas. "Not much," I replied casually. "What's up?" "Don't pretend," Margaret scolded. "I want to know what is going on." She grabbed my arm and dragged me into the girls' bathroom. She was breathing hard and kept staring at my face as if trying to find some hidden secrets there. Suki Thomas was putting on lipstick in front of the mirror. Then Suki started brushing her bleached blonde hair. Margaret stared at me without speaking, waiting for Suki to leave. "I've got to go," I said impatiently, shifting my backpack to the other shoulder. "Just wait," Margaret replied. Suki finally left. She flashed me a wink as she passed by and gave me a thumbs up. I hoped Margaret hadn't caught it. I didn't really want to discuss the dare with Margaret. I knew she wouldn't understand. I wasn't sure I understood myself. But I guess it was too late to play innocent. "The whole school is talking about you," Margaret declared. It was supposed to be an accusation, but I have to admit I liked the idea of everyone talking about me. It was kind of exciting to be some kind of celebrity, just once in my life. "They say you accepted a dare," Margaret continued, pushing a strand of red hair off her freckled forehead. "To kill Mr. Northwood. Everyone's talking about it. But it isn't true, is it?" I hesitated. I could see how upset she was. "No, no way," I muttered, avoiding her accusing eyes. "Then why are Zach and Lanny taking bets?" Margaret demanded. "Huh? They are?" My surprise was genuine. No one had told me that any bets were being made. I have to admit I was really shocked to hear about it. The bell rang. "Margaret, we're going to be late," I said, edging toward the door. She stepped in front of me and blocked my escape. "They're taking bets. Everyone is betting on whether you'll do it or not. This is crazy, Joanna. It really is." "Yeah," I agreed. "Yeah, it is. It's crazy." Margaret is right, I told myself, sitting in math class, staring out the window at a gray day. A light snow was falling, wet snowflakes clinging silently to the window pane. "It's crazy. The whole idea is crazy. There's no way I'm going through with this. No way." It had seemed like such a romantic thing to say that night up on River Ridge. It was so exciting to be up there with Dennis. I wanted to make him happy. I wanted so desperately for him to like me. But I'd had a lot of time to think about it. In fact, I hadn't been able to think about anything else, and I knew I couldn't do it. I looked for Dennis after school. I had to tell him. I had to tell him the dare was off. But I couldn't find him. Lanny came running up to me in the hall. "Over $1,000, he whispered excitedly, grinning at me. "Do you believe it?" "Huh?" I stared back at him, trying to figure out what he was telling me. $1,000 so far," he repeated, whispering, "and you get half of it." "I do?" I didn't realize. "If you know what happens to you-know-who," Lanny added. "But wait," I cried. I wanted to tell him he had to return the money. "Got to run," Lanny cried, trotting away. "Later." He disappeared around the corner. $500, I thought. I'd never had that kind of money in my life. I'd never seen $500. I looked down at the big moth hole in the sleeve of my sweater. $500 could buy a few new sweaters, I thought wistfully. But it was crazy. So totally crazy. I wasn't killing Mr. Northwood for the money. I was killing him to help Dennis. Just for Dennis. Dennis had dared me. And you can't wimp out on a dare. And, whoa, girl, what was I thinking? I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill Mr. Northwood even if I wanted to. Could I? That night, Mom was home early for once. We had a pretty nice dinner together. I forced myself not to think about the dare and all that was going on at school over it. When Mom asked me what was happening at school, I made up some things about class projects and the annual talent show. I felt guilty lying, but what could I do? I couldn't tell her what was really on my mind. The phone rang a little after 7. I ran to pick it up. I didn't want Mom to get there first in case it was Dennis. And it was. "Dennis, Mom's home," I whispered. "I can't talk." "Saturday," he said. "The bets are all for Saturday. I'm counting on you, Joanna." Then he hung up. Chapter 21. I stared out the kitchen window at Mr. Northwood's backyard. The late afternoon sun had drifted behind large gray clouds. Yesterday's snow had stopped after a few hours, leaving only a powdery film over the grass and bare trees. 2 enormous black crows had perched on top of the tall woodpile in the center of Mr. Northwood's yard. They were bobbing their heads and cawing loudly. They seemed to be having some kind of argument. When Mr. Northwood appeared in the yard, zipping up his red and black plaid wool coat, the crows gave a startled cry and flapped away. I watched Mr. Northwood as he pulled a red wool ski cap over his bushy gray hair. Then he made his way to the woodpile. It was stacked so high, so many logs, it rose up over his head. He bent down and picked up a couple of logs from a lower stack. Then, bundling them in his arms, he started back to his house. I swallowed hard. I had a sudden idea. Maybe I wouldn't have to shoot Mr. Northwood. Maybe I could kill him another way and make it look like an accident. Yes, I cried aloud, so excited my legs were trembling. Yes! I heard his kitchen storm door slam. He disappeared into his house. I ran outside. I didn't stop to get my coat. I knew I didn't have much time. I had watched Mr. Northwood bring wood into the house before. He always carried 2 logs at a time. He always made 3 or 4 trips. I knew he would be back out for 2 more logs in a matter of seconds. I took a deep breath of the frozen air and started to run. I prayed he wouldn't see me. I had to get behind the woodpile before he returned. My legs felt as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. Halfway across his backyard, I glanced at his house. No sign of him. With a desperate gasp, I forced my legs to move. Got to get there. Got to get there. I practically dived behind a tall wall of logs as I heard Mr. Northwood's kitchen door slam again. Keeping low behind the woodpile, I struggled to catch my breath, listening to him humming softly to himself as he returned for more logs. Could I do it? Could I? The timing had to be just right. I heard his footsteps. His humming grew louder. I knew he was just about at the woodpile now. I tensed both hands. I raised them above my head and placed them against the rough wall of logs. I suddenly felt weak, so weak, as if all my muscles were melting away. No, I told myself, don't give in to that, don't weaken. Mr. Northwood was on the other side of the woodpile. I could hear his whistling breaths. I could hear the scrape of his corduroy trouser legs. So close, so close. I heard him let out a soft groan as he bent over to pick up logs. And I heaved against the tall woodpile with all my might. I shoved against it with both hands and then my entire body. The logs toppled forward. Yes! I heard Mr. Northwood's startled cry. The logs dropped onto him, buried him beneath them. He uttered a curse and then cried out in pain. I stepped around to see him struggling to climb out. I froze as he stared up at me, his blue eyes cold and angry. I was disappointed. I had expected the logs to fall on his head, to knock him out. But he called out my name. He shoved a log off his chest and started to climb to his feet. No, I said aloud. No, no, I couldn't allow that. He wasn't supposed to climb out. I lifted a heavy log off the tangle of logs. It was covered with dark brown bark and had a sharp point on one side where a branch had been broken off. No, no, no. I swung the log down as hard as I could on top of his red wool ski cap. A loud oof escaped his mouth. His skull made a disgusting sound as it cracked open. Then his mouth dropped open and his blue eyes spun wildly like marbles in his head. Blood poured down from under the cap like a red waterfall over his face. Then his head dropped back, and his entire body sprawled backward onto the logs. Yuck! What a mess! I whispered, shaking my head. The sound of his skull cracking kept repeating in my mind. I wondered if I would ever be able to crack open an egg without thinking of Mr. Northwood. With a shudder, I bent over him and placed my finger under his nose. I kept it there for several seconds until I was sure he wasn't breathing. Then I started picking up logs and arranging them on top of his body. I dropped the bloody one onto his face. I piled 2 or 3 more over his chest. My heart was pounding as I stepped back to admire my work. Did it look like an accident? Yes. What a terrible accident. Poor Mr. Northwood was killed when his woodpile collapsed on top of him. That's what everyone would say. Poor Mr. Northwood. I took a last look, dropped 1 more log over his chest, and hurried to the house to call Dennis with the good news.